A Puffin Called Fido, written and illustrated by Pilkington. Gina lives in the Westman Isles, just south of Iceland. Every spring she looks forward to the return of the millions of puffins that visit the island to mate and raise their families. The puffin chicks are fed and cared for in the warm, dark comfort of underground burrows. Their parents dig these deep into the soft soil with their strong, colorful beaks and powerful legs, then gather flowers and straw to make them warm and cozy. The chicks grow quickly, and the short summer passes. Towards the end of August, Gina loves to go out at night with the other children, rescuing puffin chicks. They have emerged from their burrows for the first time and are confused by the town lights, which must look like moonlight reflecting off the sea. Instead of splashing gently into the ocean, they crash onto the hard concrete streets. Gina and her dad were proud to return home, to show her mom 3 fat, fluffy chicks and a slightly smaller, befuddled-looking one. The next morning, Gina went with her dad to a beach close by to release the chicks. She took them one at a time out of the box and threw them high in the sky so that they could flap and fly to a life of freedom on the vast Atlantic Ocean. The first 3 took gleefully to the air and disappeared into the distance, but when Gina threw up the last and smallest chick, it came down with a thud. She tried again, but it just wouldn't fly. Gina's dad suggested she should take it home in the box and look after it for a while, until it got stronger. When they returned, Gina's mom was happy to help and borrowed an old empty rabbit hutch from a neighbor. They cleaned it out and found some fresh straw to line the floor, to make it as warm and cozy as his own nest must have been. Gina also found an old cup for water, and her mom dug out a rather fine food bowl with Fido written on it. Gina thought it was such a nice bowl, and that Fido would be a very suitable name for her new friend. Life in the box was just fine for Fido. Gina's dad was a fisherman, and every day would come home with fresh fish for the family, and more than enough left over for Fido. At first, Gina would mash the fish down and feed it to him on a spoon, but he was soon capable of eating it straight out of the bowl and quickly became chirpier and stronger. It wasn't long before he was following Gina around the garden. Pretty soon he was strong enough to follow Gina wherever she went, whether it was to the shops, on an errand for her mother, or to the beach for a walk. He loved most of all going to the playground, where his favorite pastime was sitting on Gina's lap on the swing. But he also enjoyed sliding down the slide and riding on the seesaw. He wasn't heavy enough to do it properly, but it was still fun. He even went on a visit to Gina's play school, where the children all made a big fuss of him. Fido felt quite at home with the children. In fact, it seemed that the bump he had received on his head when he crash-landed had caused him to forget altogether that he was a puffin. Fido became quite famous in the small fishing village, and everyone knew him by name and would stop and say hello. But Gina's mom explained one day that it was not really a proper life for a seabird, and that they would soon somehow have to find a way to help him realize that he was a wild seabird and not a human. Gina thought her dad was the cleverest in the world. He had noticed the way Fido followed and copied everything that Gina did. So, she would have to teach him how to fly. And he had an idea how to go about it. In the playground, there was what Gina called a whizzer, a rope and pulley contraption that enabled Gina to whiz across the playground. He worked out on paper that if he made a small harness out of a piece of rope and attached it to the whizzer, Gina would be able to lie comfortably in a flying position, and her arms would be free for flapping. The word got around, and on the day they had planned, a large group of friends came to watch. Gina got into position and just tried whizzing at first, but the second time she flapped her arms as well. By the time she had done it a third time, Fido was very interested indeed. The fourth time she did it, flapping her arms furiously, Gina's dad threw Fido up into the air. He copied Gina and flapped his wings, and to the cheers of the crowd, he flew for the first time. He went 3 times around the playground before crash landing on the grass. The next day, after a bit more practice, Gina and her parents took Fido to the beach, where he had failed to fly that first day. Gina let Fido sniff the sea air for a while. Then, with a tear in her eye, she threw him high into the air. Fido opened his wings, flapped, and flew in 2 big circles. He then gave a little squawk, as if to say goodbye, then headed off for the open sea. The 3 of them watched him get smaller and smaller until he finally disappeared into the distance. Gina knew it was for the best, but she was so very, very sad to see her best friend Fido go. But that was not the end of the story. To Gina's great delight, a long time after, when Fido was fully grown with a brightly colored beak, he returned with a mate. And, instead of nesting with the rest of the puffins at the top of the cliff, they dug their burrow in a corner of Gina's garden and set about turning it into a home. She felt almost as proud as the puffin parents did the day their scrawny little chick hatched.